Polyp works here. So after the release of chapter 1098 of One Piece, there has been a lot of Monkey D. Dragon slander across several platforms on the internet. I've even committed to a little bit of it myself. But here's the light at the end of the tunnel for all this. In the entirety of One Piece, the one faction that has stood tall and true with no moles or spies in its organization are the revolutionaries. The revolutionaries have never had a mole or a spy or a ne'er-do-well of any sort in its ranks, and I think we should be grateful for that. Mind you, Yonko organizations have had moles. The Marines have had moles. The Marines have set up moles in pirate organizations. We have had moles in warlord organizations. Remember Vivi? And Igram and I guess Karoo, technically. But we have never had a mole in the Revolutionary Army. And I think we should be thankful for that. Though if you've seen the title of this video, this has all been a bit to set you up for this. Ivankov, Imperial Ivankov, Queen of Kamabakka Kingdom, is the revolutionary mole because Ivankov is evil. Now, when I say evil, I mean that I think from the beginning, from the start of the Revolutionary Army, Ivankov put himself in place to undermine Dragon at some point, because there are various points in the narrative where Ivankov as an entity doesn't make sense and has certain motives and certain abilities that sort of place him in a very comfortable spot no matter the conflict or situation. One important thing that's going to permeate throughout this entire video is that Ivankov is two-faced, both metaphorically and literally, which is kind of the style of writing that you see in One Piece a lot of the time. But often, Ivankov will betray himself in one way to disguise his actual motives. We've seen this a lot in combat, in which Ivankov will portray himself as weak, only to seamlessly retaliate against the opposition and subdue them. This also comes into play when fighting the likes of Magellan. It seems as though Ivankov is down for the count, but will just spring back up, pull a literal mask, a literal face of makeup off of his own face and say, "I'm fine. It didn't touch me because I was wearing so much makeup." That is interesting. And then two, he has a literal actual face because he can transform into a woman. So he is two-faced in more ways than one, and there will be multiple examples of that throughout the video. So, first of all, let's just go over real quick what Ivankov is based on and how he's been talked about in the narrative. So, Imperial Ivankov is based off of Dr. Frankenfurter from Rocky Horror Picture Show. You may remember the film that was adapted from the musical play that Tim Curry played in which he was Dr. Frankenfurter. So, in terms of design, even down to the face makeup, it's very obvious that Ivankov comes from Tim Curry's portrayal of the character. Now, what's very interesting about the two characters is that they kind of align very similarly in ideals, even with Frankenfurter being an alien kind of aligns with Ivankov and the whole ideal of being a newcomer. And being a newcomer, you are a bit more elevated in your identity than an Okama, because newcomers under Ivankov have been both man and woman. So their perspective on life is a little different than your Okama in One Piece. Other than that, both characters, both Frankenfurter and Ivankov, are both doctors, because we know that Ivankov is very well adept with the mechanisms of the human body due to his Devil Fruit. And both of them have this weird obsession with the human condition. However, Dr. Frankenfurter wants to develop the perfect man as his own personal plaything, whereas we don't really know what Ivankov's main goal is. One very interesting point to note that will swing back around a little later is that in Rocky Horror Picture Show, Frankenfurter has two underlings who are brother and sister. You have Riff Raff and Magenta. So we'll come back to that, but I thought I should mention that here because that's going to be a very important point as to some espionage that has gone on in One Piece. But yes, this is whom he's based off of. Now, with that in mind, Frankenfurter is the villain of Rocky Horror Picture Show, which does not bode well for Ivankov being based on him. In One Piece, there is this running theme, right? If a person is talked about favorably by others, it's usually the opposite when you actually encounter the person being talked about, giving a lot of credence to the phrase, don't meet your heroes. We see this in Punk Hazard with Caesar Clown, how all the denizens of Punk Hazard refer to Caesar Clown as master, but it turns out Caesar Clown is a terrible, terrible, awful human being. We see this too in Dressrosa, in which all the underlings of Dolphy regard him as the young master and hold him in high regard, but Doflamingo is a psychopath. So that's not too good. But also, the opposite exists. If a person is talked about unfavorably and is made out to be the villain, most likely they are very benevolent and helpful. Perhaps a little rough around the edges, but helpful. And to represent my main example of this occurrence, we have Dr. Correa, or Doctorine, in Drum Island. Everybody thought she was a witch, but in actuality, she is the only good doctor on Drum Island. So, with that being said, Mr. 2, Betham Bon Clay, regards Ivankov as a miracle worker in the early parts of Impel Down. When we meet Ivankov, he does work miracles, but he completely denounces the entire idea of him being any sort of deity or miracle worker and just regards those types of things as titles placed on him. What is weird about Ivankov in Impel Down is that I wouldn't necessarily call him a bad guy, but he's not a bad guy in the way that Blackbeard's not a bad guy. He is a person who lives by a code of ethics and will assist those who he deems worthy because their ideals fit inside his code of ethics. Because the only reason why he helped Luffy is because on death's door, Luffy pleaded to him to help Bon Clay, even though he was in worse shape than Bon Clay during that time where Ivankov and Inazuma found the two. So it's a mixed bag, but things get a little more complex as we move on. The first point that has me a little weirded out about Ivankov's morality is the first showing of the hormone fruit. In Impel Down, Ivankov is attacked by a man named Bellet, claiming that he has ruined his life because he was the former prince of a kingdom, and it is suggested that after his father pilgrimaged to Kamabakka Kingdom and became a woman, that the kingdom fell into disarray. And now Bellet, hard on his luck, has found himself in Impel Down and has located Ivankov and is seeking to take revenge. Ivankov reflects the cannonball that Bellet shoots at him with his death wink, which is a very interesting thing that we may come back to later. But anyway, he reflects the cannonball back at Bellet, blows Bellet up, and then proceeds to inject Bellet with his Emporio female hormones, changing Bellet from a man to a woman. What is interesting about this is that we don't know why Bellet's father, the former king of some country, was going to Kamabakka Kingdom. See, no one is born in Kamabakka Kingdom. They just come there. So I'm wondering if Kamabakka Kingdom was something else, because thanks to the backstory that is presented to us in the recent chapters of Kuma's whole thing, we find out that Kuma meets Ivankov first, along with Guinea. And during this time, it's being suggested, at least, that Kamabakka Kingdom did not exist. So it must have been something before Ivankov arrived there and turned into what it is today. So I'm wondering, was Bellet the former prince of what the kingdom used to be? And the reason why his father was going to Kamabakka Kingdom, it was not for a pilgrimage of any sort. He was going back to try to reclaim his land after it was taken over, perhaps. But we're going to talk about that a little later. The point I'm trying to make about Ivankov, and furthermore about the hormone fruit, is that Ivankov's ability showcase in that moment is excessive, because if you compare Ivankov to similar characters who seem antagonistic but turn out to be kind of goofy goobers later on, like say Hancock, for example. Hancock's ability is very oppressive, but the thing about Hancock is that she didn't follow through and ruin anybody's life with her ability. Matter of fact, in the presence of Luffy, her ability was shown not to work, which pacifies her pretty immediately. Whereas with Ivankov, not only do you get the Devil Fruit showcase, you get a martial art showcase, because he reflects the cannonball with Deathwink and then follows up on a defeated enemy with the hormone injection. So not only does he defeat his enemy, but he goes through great length to embarrass them further and potentially threaten their survival by turning them into a woman in the guts of this horrible, monstrous prison. In context, this is very excessive and very, very black in how it is shown, because it's kind of joked off as this funny scene, but no, it's terrifying, because he sent a man to die, because now any sort of physicality that he amassed as a man has been taken away from him now as a very lithe young woman. So that's just weird, if you ask me. But moving on with his abilities, let's talk about Kamabakka Kingdom now. When it comes to Kamabakka Kingdom, I'm going to take you on a little ride real fast, okay? So in One Piece, especially if you've been reading it for a long time, you kind of pick up that there are certain locations that are heavily afflicted by Devil Fruit abilities. Either the location itself or the denizens of that location. Take Thriller Bark, for example. The zombies are fueled thanks to the powers of the Shadow Fruit. In Dressrosa, people and animals are afflicted by the abilities of the Hobby Fruit. And in Tatoland, we have a variety of homies, which are byproducts of the Soul Fruit running around, correct? So, keeping that in mind, I think that the hormone fruit plays a key role in how Kamabakka Kingdom looks right now, because the hormone fruit can affect hormones, so it can affect size, growth, pigment, etc., etc. You know what else has hormones besides people? Plants and animals. So the reason why you have so many weird animals in and surrounding the island of Kamabakka Kingdom is because of Ivankov's influence. The reason why the grass and the trees are pink are because of Ivankov's influence. Now, you may be asking, okay, if Kamabakka Kingdom has been transformed by Ivankov, have we seen it before Ivankov's arrival? I believe we have. During Odin's adventures, right, he comes across a particular kingdom. That kingdom is called the Yari Kingdom. Yari meaning spear, right? It's not officially named anywhere, which is weird. It doesn't even show up on the Wikia, but this is an island that he comes to. And I'm just dubbing it the Spear Kingdom because it literally says spear on one of the buildings, okay? So here's the interesting part about the Spear Kingdom and the Kamabakka Kingdom. When we are introduced to the Spear Kingdom, we have a grove following a forest, following the Yarni Kingdom castle. When we are first introduced to Kamabakka Kingdom, we have a grove with animals at it, a forest, which is pink, and then the castle in the background. Now, what's interesting about the castle of the Yarni Kingdom and the castle of the Kamabakka Kingdom is that they both have very similar architecture, which on one hand, I want to say that if Ivankov and the boys invaded this kingdom, which may or may not have been Bellet's original kingdom, and took it over, they could have just rebuilt the castle to their means, or given how weird devil fruits can sometimes be, looking at the whip fruit, which can make buildings move, perhaps Ivankov has a hormone to change the build of a castle. Perhaps that is also an ability, because the shots in which both these kingdoms are introduced feel too similar to be coincidence. They may be, but I have good reason to believe that the Yarni Kingdom is now the Kamabakka Kingdom. And I think this Yarni Kingdom may be the kingdom that Bellet came from, and Ivankov simply took it over after running the previous king of the Yarni Kingdom out, which is why he came back. What also gives credence to Kamabakka Kingdom being fairly new, akin to the likes of Totland, is because we don't ever see any long-standing lineage being associated with Kamabakka Kingdom. It's as if Ivankov is the founder and first ruler of this queendom being established. Unlike, say, Amazon Lily, in which we have a long line of empresses before Hancock. We have Glorissa and we have Shocky, for example. In recent chapters, we've even seen Glorissa as a younger woman. So yes, Amazon Lily has a long history of monarchy, whereas Kamabakka Kingdom doesn't get that same treatment. Much like with Big Mom's Tatoland, it's a artificially created archipelago that she made after coming into prominence and having so many children. So much like Big Mom, I believe Kamabakka Kingdom was built on the back of a previously existing kingdom, a previously existing nation, and has just become what it is thanks to the devil fruit meddling of Ivankov. Now, on the topic of Kamabakka Kingdom itself, it's just kind of interesting that Ivankov is a monarch of sorts. He is holding the title of someone who owns a monarchy, a queendom or a kingdom. But the revolutionaries, of which he is a founding member of, aren't really for monarchies or kingdoms, especially if they are abusive towards their people. We see this even recently when the Revolutionary Army go into the Sorbet Kingdom to relieve them of their corrupt king. But what causes a bit of a moral dilemma is that Ivankov isn't really an upstanding royal in how he's being portrayed, because, okay, follow me here. Ivankov has the hormone fruit, right? Which means he can inject people with dopamine. So he can inject people and make them feel as though something that was once a bad idea could potentially be a good idea because he has that ability. He has these light brainwashing aspects to him. They are in his toolkit. They are potentially very dangerous weapons at his disposal. So wouldn't that turn make him a corrupt ruler? This abrasiveness can also be seen, especially when Sanji lands in Kamabakka Kingdom and the denizens of the island feel the need to impose their cultural beliefs onto Sanji. So if they are this way with newcomers, that only speaks to reason how Ivankov is. Because if Ivankov didn't reflect this behavior, his subjects wouldn't act this way. So that makes me think that there is a particular culture of making everybody kind of homogenous on the island, which is very interesting given the circumstances of which I think the island and its denizens and its flora and fauna came to be. Now we're just going to touch base on his role in the Revolutionary Army, and then we're going to swing back around to the Kamabakka Kingdom. So follow me here. So when you first meet Ivankov, it is in level 5.5 of Impel Down. When explaining the nature of level 5.5, Ivankov explains that it was built or dug out 100 years ago by some individual. What makes this a very interesting lie is that he is personally affiliated with the person who made 5.5, that being Morley, who has the push fruit, and who effectively escaped Impel Down way back when, over 100 years ago. Now, what's interesting about this is that, number one, they both end up in the same organization, and Morley is a commander in said organization. On top of that, both Ivankov and Morley have a very similar outlook on life. They're both Okama. So you're meaning to tell me that when Ivankov was captured, whatever nature fell under that, he had no idea about level 5.5 and just happened upon it like as a product of circumstance. I don't believe that for a second, which makes things a bit treacherous, because you knew you were going to prison and you had no problem going to prison because you knew you could lay low in a particular area of the prison where it was safe, and then that would give you an opportunity to strike and break out when the time was right. Because we don't know if there's a tunnel leading out of Impel Down from level 5.5. How they broke out of Impel Down could have just been a product of circumstance due to the flow of the narrative. But there has to be an exit point in which Morley escaped Impel Down. So I think this is what Ivankov had in mind all the time, but due to the circumstances of Luffy being there and them having to go rescue Ace and all that, and then of course Luffy's ability to make allies out of anyone, perhaps that just changed the flow of the entire narrative and things happened how they happened. But it doesn't necessarily make sense that Ivankov was so confident if he didn't have a backup plan bearing that the events that happened didn't happen. So, and him saying that he didn't know who made the tunnel or made it for level 5.5 is a lie, because he's associated with that person. Morley had to have told him that there was an area in Impel Down for him to go. What's troubling about this is that why did he get captured in the first place? Due to his showings in both Impel Down and Marineford, he is not someone to be captured lightly. So was there an alternative plan to being in Impel Down and having so much surveillance and control in the area that was established for him long ago? I'm just pointing these things out because now it leads us into some other things, namely what may be the start of Ivankov undermining Dragon as leader and potentially taking over the Revolutionary Army. Because, okay, here's the thing. Baltigo is at least portrayed as a place that's fairly hidden and you can get to easily, correct? Okay, so despite this, not only was someone large, loud, and boisterous able to find the island and infiltrate it, this person was also heavily injured, because after this we see that he has cybernetic enhancements. Of course, I am talking about Burgess of the Blackbeard Pirates. After his scuffle with Sabo in Dressrosa, he manages to find Baltigo, actually seek it out, which then he leaks to Blackbeard. Blackbeard attacks Baltigo, which forces the revolutionaries to bail and go to Kamabakka Kingdom. Now, this reeks of a setup to me, and I'm so shocked that no one has pointed this out. However, remember when I mentioned that Dr. Frankenfurter had a brother and sister in his employ, Riffraff and Magenta, right? Here's the thing. Burgess has purple hair and a purple beard, right? He is also styled after a wrestler, which means he's a type of performer, a predominantly masculine performer, but a performer nonetheless, right? Okay. Cool. Then, when you look at all the members of the Revolutionary Army, there is one person that stands out like a sore thumb amongst all the steampunk gear. There is one character that just bleeds association with Ivankov, and that is Bello Betty. Bello Betty has the same color scheme as Ivankov, the same color of hair as Ivankov, and has a open uniform much like Ivankov does in his burlesque getup. Now, on the subject of burlesque, a burlesque dancer is a type of performer, much how like Burgess being a wrestler is also a type of performer. Now, Bello Betty falls into the same category because she can always be seen with the Revolutionary Army flag. A person who twirls a flag is called a color guard or part of the flag corps, which is another type of performer, which works well with her ability known as the pump fruit. So in short, they're all performers. What's also very interesting about Bello Betty that she says on Kamabakka Kingdom, which makes this even more interesting, is that in chapter 905, she and Koala are having a conversation. This is during the time of the Levely, in which Bello Betty asks Koala, so about the Ryugu Kingdom taking part in the Levely, do you have a problem with that, Koala? And Koala says, not at all. The actual enemy is the celestial dragons, not the world government itself. But with Bello Betty being the Eastern commander of the Revolutionary Army, it's kind of weird that she's posing this question to Koala if it's understood that everybody in the army is fighting for the same thing. This presents a very interesting dilemma, seeing as how she's so high ranked in the army, yet she seems to have her own agenda when it comes to the actual mission statement of the organization itself, especially when she's pumping up those who are in countries the Revolutionary Army are liberating to take control of their own lives. It's a very weird cacophony of ideals going on here, which makes me think that Bello Betty may not be all of what she seems. She could be, again, in the collusion syndicate going on with Ivankov and however many supporters Ivankov has within the Revolutionary Army. So what I'm saying is that the riffraff and magenta under our Frankfurter character here in Ivankov are Bello Betty and Burgess. Bello Betty and Burgess are the children of Ivankov. They are under him, and they are set forth to undermine the revolutionary army. Perhaps the reason for this is because Ivankov saw the potential in having Dragon as the figurehead and having him, perhaps, even though we haven't seen Dragon do anything, but perhaps there is some value in him being the face of the organization, where Ivankov does the actual work behind the scenes, some of which Dragon does not know about, because there have been several occasions in which Ivankov will blurt out in very excited talk about his plans or the plans that are going on, as if he has some deeper personal connection to the actions being performed. Like when he, Sabo, and Dragon were discussing the events that happened after they saved Kuma. He shouted proudly, now they will have the opportunity to experience hunger, you know? It's setting Ivankov up as something other than a revolutionary. Because when you think about it and how the Celestial Dragons are acting after the fact, like when Kuma goes back to Mary Joas, which is very funny. They only saved Kuma for him to go back to the place he was just saved from, but I digress. When you think about it, them being without their normal food rations is just a roadblock for them. So Ivankov is proud about something that is, for a lack of better phrase, just spiteful. It doesn't actually accomplish anything. It doesn't actually do anything. So he's hyping up this sort of frivolous victory as to say that the organization has done something here, when in actuality, the only person who has gotten any valuable information out of this whole ordeal is Sabo. So due to Ivankov's gift of gab, this could be a distraction to make it seem as though Dragon and Sabo have done something, while patiently listening in on the information that he does not have regarding Emu and the 5 elders from Sabo, the actual valuable information. So he's a bait and switch. He's a distraction, is what I'm saying. Now, swinging it back to that first display of power I mentioned, where Ivankov uses Deathwing to reflect the cannonball Bella shot at him, right? You know what's really interesting about Ivankov and sort of corralling the revolutionaries into his domain, okay? As far as we know, the revolutionaries in terms of manpower have not shown to have the chops. They just haven't, okay? We haven't seen Vice Admiral, Rear Admiral characters in the revolutionaries, whereas the Marines, you have a cornucopia of different lads of all different strengths, right? Same thing with a lot of pirate factions. You got your infantry, you got your generals, etc., etc. You got a lot of dudes. The revolutionaries don't have a lot of dudes, not a lot of important ones. However, what has been lost about Ivankov, which is very interesting, is that while the revolutionaries are on his island, you know what he has on that island? 99 masters of New Kama Kempo, who are all relative to Sanji at the start of the time skip. That's a heavy order of dudes to have, man. No one else has that. 99 people with that high a level of proficiency in martial arts. That's pretty impressive. So right now, Ivankov's militia is bigger and more skilled than the Revolutionary Army. What's also very interesting is that Ivankov seems to jealously hold the secrets of New Kama Kempo, because Sanji only learns a few things because he has fought 99 practitioners of the martial art. That's how he picked up some things that we see Ivankov do, because he's fought 99 people that use the same sort of skills as Ivankov. However, no one in the Revolutionary Army uses new Kamabakka. Why is that? Why is Ivankov like stonewalling anyone from learning it? Because so far, no one else knows this martial art. No one is teaching anyone how to use this martial art. And if this is a martial art that allows you to reflect cannonballs by blinking at them, I think that would be a very valuable skill to have at one side. So, yeah, that's super interesting, ain't it? So who is Ivankov working for or working with? I think Ivankov is an associate of Blackbeard. And at some point, he will undermine the Revolutionary Army, most likely leading to Dragon's death at some point. I think this is going to happen because the story is setting up for Sabo to be his own man, because we cannot play the song and dance of one of Luffy's brothers perpetually being in the shadow of a greater man with Ace and Whitebeard. So it only makes sense that something would happen that would propel Sabo in being his own man and running his own organization. And from the looks of things, he's gotten closer to the truth than Dragon has ever gotten. What's also weird is that in that debriefing between Ivankov, Sabo, and Dragon, Ivankov just casually knows the family name or the house name of Emu. Don't you find that weird? So I think he knows that because, like Blackbeard, Ivankov is a historian. He is a very learned individual, which is why I think the two probably get along fairly well. And it's just kind of weird narratively that they've been in the same places twice. Blackbeard was an Impel Down and Blackbeard was in Marine Force. I just find that kind of interesting that the two wouldn't be connected. And Burgess was also there, which is even more interesting that we're then tying Burgess to the displacement of the Revolutionary Army, which is something I refuse to believe that he did on his own. He got intel to do, which caused Blackbeard to ransack the island and put the Revolutionary Army in the control of Ivankov because they relocated to his land. So yes, I think Ivankov is working with Blackbeard for some unknown purpose. Perhaps maybe when Pirate Island is a kingdom, perhaps there's some sort of workings in which when Pirate Island is made a kingdom through some sort of circumstance, Kamabakka Kingdom will also be made a kingdom. Maybe that's Ivankov's real goal. And all this revolutionary nonsense may be a front because we don't know how his character has developed from childhood up until now. There are some things we are just not seeing. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Give me your thoughts.